So the current title, is Trusting in God, and drawn from the book of Romans, the letter of Romans, verse that reads, "But to one who without works trusts him who justifies the ungodly, such faith is reconciled as righteousness." Some people today try to control every aspect of their lives to become successful. But success may have little to do with controllable actions. It turns out that while intelligence, practice, and ability matter, there is another uncontrollable quality that matters just as much, if not more. I remember reading about the Canadian hockey players in Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers, The Story of Success. Most people assumed that hockey up north is a meritocracy. The best players rise to the top and play in the NHL. We would like that to be accurate, but their success often hinges on another aspect. A set of numbers can explain why some players make the NHL and others don't. A player's birth date matters a lot. Players whose birthdays occur in the first quarter after the cutoff date are more likely to play in the NHL than those whose birthdays are in the last quarter, right before the cutoff date. In fact, very few, if any at all, of the NHL players are born in that last quarter before the cutoff date. Why is that? Players with an early birthday are almost a year older than those with late ones. So they are physically bigger sooner and likely get more playing time and develop faster than the younger ones. Success in Canadian hockey often goes to those who just happen to have the right birthday. Here's another story involving birthdays. I once had a conversation with a man in his mid-90s. We spoke about his military service. He had been in a lot of the frontline combat in the European theater during World War II. He remarked about how his age affected what he did and experienced as a soldier. Had he been born 18 months later, his experience would have been much different. He might not have even gone to Europe or even seen a battle at all. Here's one more example. I frequently listen to audiobooks on my travels here and to New York City. My latest book is The Generals, Patton, MacArthur, Marshall, and Winning of World War II by Winston Groom. The three great generals were all born in the decade of the 1880s and spent time in the western part of the U.S. earlier in their military careers. So they all had experience in what we might call the Old West. Like the hockey players and the World War II veterans, when they were born, made a difference. A year or two sooner or later would have changed their lives. Success involves more than intelligence, practice, and ability. Randomness or timing has something to do with it too. As with the pursuit of success, some people think that rules and doing what matters most to God is most important. Many believe that caring for the poor and acts of social justice matter when it comes to personal salvation. When they do good or the right thing or even worship the right way, they earn God's favor. But in the letter to the Romans, Paul tells another story. Paul writes to the Romans to introduce himself. ask their support for the Christian church in Jerusalem, and advise them regarding a significant challenge they face. He did not start the church in Rome. Neither had he visited it yet. He was, however, aware of a problem between two groups in the church. The Jewish Christians had recently returned to Rome after having been expelled during the reign of Emperor Claudius. The Gentile Christians, who had been brought up in pagan-worshiping families, had stayed in Rome during Claudius's reign. The two groups had been reunited and were worshiping together, but were facing cultural difficulties. Their backgrounds and worldviews were very different. One sticking point was whether to follow the law as described in the Jewish scriptures. As we know, Jesus, his disciples, Mary and the other woman, and the rest of the early followers were Jewish and followed Jewish customs and religious laws. With the number of non-Jewish born Christians increasing, many in the church questioned the relevance of Jewish customs. Paul's advice was simple. All people were to receive God based on faith. Paul's claim was there is one God who in one person, Jesus Christ, chose redemption for all people and for the whole creation. Paul added that God is not only the God of Israel, but the God of all peoples. He then stated that faith was not a matter of right doctrine, practice, interpreting the Bible one particular way, following religious rules, abstaining from certain things, or even voting for one political candidate or another. What matters was faith. What is the faith that Paul spoke about in the letter of Romans? He wrote, "Faith is loyalty to the one God who is God of all people." In our reading this morning, Paul used Abraham as an example of faith. God picked Abraham. As we heard in this morning's reading from Genesis, God spoke to him one day and told him to leave his country. Abraham had not earned favor from God. He wasn't particularly holy or exceptional before his interaction with God. In fact, we're told nothing about Abraham, whose name at the time was Abram. All we learn is that Abram trusted God and did what God asked. Moreover, as Paul wrote, for the promise that he would inherit the world did not come to Abraham or his descendants through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. This statement by Paul points out that the law didn't come into being until centuries later when Moses went up Mount Sinai. Therefore, faith matters, not religion as prescribed by religious laws. Paul made the common denominator for Jewish and Gentile Christians in Rome not a set of rules, but belief, hope, and trust in God. In other words, faith. At times, we can get caught up with religious rules. We think that only Christians worship God the right way, not Muslims, Hindus, Jews, or other religions. We might think that Episcopalians or Anglicans worship God the right way, and the Catholics and Protestants traditions and the other Protestants have it all wrong. We might even think that we at St. Peter's worship God the right way, and all other Episcopal churches are misguided. But Paul said that is wrong. God is the God of all peoples. We just worship God the way we prefer. We don't pass the peace. Thank you very much. We also can't claim that the practices we follow are correct and others are wrong. Our devotions and symbolic acts are merely expressions of our faith. More important than how we outwardly worship is our inward faith. We must remember that our salvation and the gift of grace we receive are not things we earn. We can't strive to be successful Christians. We can't strive to be religious. We can't do faith. Being a Christian is a gift from God. I will end by restating the verse that inspired my sermon this morning. The person who didn't perform religious acts but trust God, the one who freely gives salvation to the ungodly, such faith counts toward his or her right living and salvation. Faith is about trusting God. That is all.